Alright, on to sounds. Now, see, I pretty much did every sound, I would say, and I completely synthesized everything, of course, except for the music. Alright, I made a happy beep sound for the keypad. And so now you can see I use an oscillator, a saw wave thing, whatever. I don't know, it's like moved in Vital, so who knows. Then I FM'd the oscillator too, along with had a short decay time, you know, a slight rise in the pitch to get that click. And then I also added chorus and equalizer, of course, you know. This is the sound. So yeah, it's pretty simple. It's very robotic sounding, and I was like, should be fine. All right, now time for the mad beep. This is when you lose. All right, this is bad, bro. This is a square wave. Then, you know, I was initially gonna FM it to something to make it sound cool, but no. Slightly filtered off the top end. Then I added, of course, you know, a little pitch down, a short decay. Then I added a compressor and distorter, just mildly. Then you get this. You failed. You hear this when you lose? I do. Alright, next up we got a door sound. I legitimately made a door sound. Now see, this is when we start getting into more realistic territory, so I got a whatever shape, you know, completely did smear with Vital. I mean, that's such a useful tool, I'm not gonna lie. Using the jackhammer, I then FM'd that to the thing, you know, the thing. And then I, you know, slight delay, slight attack, lower down the thing, short, along with a few effects. Nothing too crazy, you know, get rid of the lows by adding a little bit of distortion on that. Then boom, we got that. That's the first portion. The second portion is we got a cool click noise. That is literally just a bunch of garbage. You know, you literally get a bunch of different waves and stuff like that. You smear them. Again, this oscillator pitch down, lower the top, short decay. And then also you make it go click with the pitch down. And a bunch of effects, pretty much the same as always. Chorus, compressor, distorter, equalizer. I equalized the hell out of that. You get a click. And when you put it together, you get that. Now see, what I did on the first one was on the second, I also pitched it down so it can kind of, you know, give a little bit more ambience to it. It shows that this was the final production, but no, I decided to lower it even more. I just felt like it was just too fast, you know? It was too fast, all that stuff, so I lowered it later. Now onto a cabinet noise. Now, this was initially pretty bad. Alright, we got a sine wave, you know, 3 sine waves, one of them smeared, you know, of course. Long attack, short decay. Again, plop that thing down with the pitch. I also added a bunch of phasers. A phaser filter, along with a bunch of other effects, and put a flanger, delay, and an EQ. And boom, we got that. I later took off some of the effects because I thought it was just a little bit too weird sounding. I initially wanted that metallic effect, but it was a little much, you know, I sounded like a bouncing ball or something. So we switched that up. You also have to pitch these real down, especially whenever you smear them, because then they can just get a little bit too high. Alright, on to I made a key sound. Alright, this one was actually pretty interesting. For instance, it's not going to show it on the video, but I actually used a reference point. From that reference point, I noticed that the frequencies were fairly high. You know, there's a lot of frequencies. So we decided to do a saw wave. And boom, we got a bunch of saw waves. You know, slightly different pitches and stuff like that. Short decay. And then of course the classic pitch. You know, I took out all the lows because we don't need those. And then we did a bunch of chorus, compressor, delay, you know, EQ. Basically I just wanted a lot of high end. Also wanted a very tingy very ambient sound. And next is footsteps. Footsteps were kind of easier than I thought it was. It's just a sine, a saw, along with, you know, classic pitch down to give it that thump thump thump. Took off a lot of the high, and we don't need those. Also tried to put in a lot more of the mids. You know, I would say mids are pretty important to this sound, along with a compressor, distorter, you know, equalizer, and a chorus. You know, especially when I accentuated the center. You know, I didn't want too much low end, I didn't want too much high end, I mean middle end. It's interesting, you can completely change the context of the footsteps with this. It turned out really well, especially since the thing is fairly randomized. Alright, so I made a gunshot. Unfortunately, OBS didn't actually capture vital this time, so you know, you have to hear right here. This was the initial version. I think it was pretty punchy, you know, all that stuff. This would be a later version of the concept, which, you know, just pretty much made it a lot more powerful. Of course, you cannot see it again, along with basically just try to distort the hell out of it. Alright, so I made the bank ambience with a bunch of stuff, really. A bunch of noise all over the place, even a sine to get some of the low end. Took off a lot of the highs, actually. You know, just made it essentially like a pad. Also randomized the pitch and a bunch of other stuff. Also threw on the compressor, you know, delay, distortion, reverb, EQ. Also added some more stuff. Basically just distortion and reverb, and taking out a few different sounds. I overlaid, they're essentially the exact same note, except played at different octaves. I also later then took the thing and, you know, pretty much just lowered it. It's the same way how I created the vault sound. So essentially you get that, you lower it down, and then I took the beginning, just kind of made it more like a punch. You wanted it more like a punch, so it sounds like the thing is opening and then hitting the end. Even though it sounds way too powerful for this, it sounds way too powerful. But yeah, we got that. Alright, this is the next sound. It's supposed to be like cars moving. I don't know if you can really hear it that well. You know, basically the same thing. Pretty simple, you know, EQ out, take out the highs, etc, etc. It's gonna be more like slight whooshes that'll come by. So I even alternated a bunch of different pitches all over the place to make it sound pretty variant. Yeah, that's the bank ambience. Alright, on to the music. Now, initially, when it came to the music, I was initially not going to do any music at all. I was decided, okay, the ambience, you know, gives not enough. It gives enough. So, why do any more? Who cares? But I decided to do it. Alright, so this is how we go. It's essentially the bank ambience, except pitch down. And of course, FL keys, you know, the best key out there, you know, the best piano out there. Essentially, I wanted this to sound like complete garbage, but like textural garbage, you know. So I added a lot of stuff to make that FL keys sound actually good, like distortion, a ton of reverb, and delay. Mind you, all these plugins are completely free. You can completely just get them. It's just that easy. Essentially, a lot of it reverb, a lot of it to make it sound pretty distorted too at the same time. I still don't know why the bank ambience lowered down is completely poppy, but you know. No, when composing this. Yeah, it was pretty random, you know. I wanted to start off with pretty textual stuff, so I started off with very high notes, in which they will then go down into a bunch of different chords. The chords, from what I remember, is F minor, and then I just kind of rolled up on the circle of fifths or something like that. No, initially I just wanted like creepy, but I feel like this is in a way better to what the idea of the game is, you know? And of course I added a bunch of more ascending notes, along with a bunch of random stuff. I even made a bunch of random chords with a bunch of different notes in them to do stuff or whatever. Just all of it together. I enjoy it better because initially it was just gonna be dark, you know? Initially it was just gonna be dark, but I enjoyed it better because in a way it sounds more like dread, which is kind of a lot of the point of which I'm trying to hit on the actual game, you know? Dread, sadness, madness. Alright, so this is how I made the N7 ambience. It's essentially a bunch of different, you know, more texture, more white noises and brown noises. Also got the sign for low end. I only pinpointed a bunch of certain frequencies that I wanted in the thing. I just thought it just sounded good, you know? And then I also try to randomize these types of textural sounds as much as I can. And if you can see on the master chain, the majority of what is on there is pretty much distortion and reverb. A lot of reverb. I also added a soft clipper because I'm just like that, bro. I'm just like that. You know, basic blood or overdrive, essentially for the color, you know, to give it a nice shine on the top end. In terms of the pitch, there wasn't really too much method for the madness. I just essentially wanted the sounds to just be at variant changes, even on octave pitches, to give it a lot more fuller and also a more progressive sound of the texture. And this is the interestinger sound. With two sine waves I made completely alternating how both of them play because I didn't want to make another instance of Vital. So I did this where it starts with a shh type of thing. The later sound of the portion, it's interesting because it sounds exactly like the tripods from War of the Worlds. I was incredibly surprised by how this sounded when I made that. I don't even care. I don't care if I get hit down with something. I'm gonna keep that in there too. So you can listen to that, you know, has like the sound. It's not a one-to-one because I'm pretty sure the tripod noise, it kind of, you know, goes up in pitch afterwards. And generally, I wanted to kind of randomize the pitches. I wanted to randomize the velocity of each one of them to give them a lot more randomness. You know, that's what you gotta do for textures, I would say. You can see how my PC completely overloads with literally anything. Like, legitimately. Slap on EQ, completely broken. It's basically World of Worlds POV, you know? Basically a day in their life. Alright, this is how... Well, essentially, when doing the voices, I needed to completely just make them really chunky, you know? Sound basically like Xbox or something like that. I added way too much stuff on there.
You better not mess this
These are the more dry vocals.
When you get there, do what you have to do.
It's really bad. It's really bad. Especially the Italian character on there. Don't ask. The only frame of reference I have is Mario, okay? Added, you know, a compressor. I'm pretty sure that's a compressor. I don't know, bro. Added crush to make it sound like garbage. Added reverb. Also origin from Semantics. I know, don't talk to me. Also even added a sampler reducer. You know, complete garbage. I wanted to sound exactly straight from it.
I'll stay in the front. When you get there, do what you have to do.
Complete dookie. Now, as of the time of this recording, I don't have the recordings from everyone else for the game. So these are essentially my reference examples. So we get to hear my reference examples. It'll probably change to everyone else's vocals. No, so I can pretty much talk about how I made the rest of the sounds, but the rest of the sounds are pretty much pretty much just made from the old sounds, except, you know, completely just alternated and stuff like that. But I'll rattle a bunch of them off here. I'll just let a bunch of the other sound effects play.